Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. I want to share with you as we begin today just how impactful this week has been to me personally, starting as we did on Monday with a discussion of the evolution of Humanity Rising into Humanity Rising Network, and to have scores of you be in touch with me via email and through the website about wanting to volunteer, and really realizing that what we're offering here is a genuine service to people all over the world that are beginning to rely on Humanity Rising, not only for information about what's going on out there, but also for an orientation to the crises that we're all collectively facing, that is imbued with the opportunities that are inherent in all our crises, because that's the vector we need to track in order to enable humanity to rise at this critical moment in our collective history to ensure the survivability of our species and over 1 million other species, given world conditions, particularly runaway climate change. It was also very powerful to listen to Ava Stoya the next day to talking about how one can access the pure consciousness that undergirds and manifests the entire cosmos into being, knowing that we are fractals of that consciousness, each one of us, like the uniqueness of a snowflake, coagulating and distilling a particular frequency and tonality of our consciousness, that if we align with the larger consciousness, can bring healing to our bodies. And to listen to his story of curing himself from bad eyesight, and then completely curing a totally shattered knee just through resting in the knowing of the one, was an extraordinary thing. And his course, The Eye of the Storm, which we're offering through Ubiquity, is a course that I intend to take because I want to learn about all that possibility, because in the end, the healing of ourselves and the healing of our communities and the healing of this beautiful planet is the single greatest task and challenge for the human race right now. We need to heal. And then yesterday to talk with Janan BK and Ilarian McCullough, these two elders, indigenous elders, and to hear from Janan, his story as an educator there in India, and his time for years living with the indigenous peoples who were completely illiterate, who had chosen not to learn to read and write. And the Copernican revolution in his awareness that it was through that primordial way of learning that one actually develops direct access with the world. And when we learn to read, those of us who are literate, and we think our literacy is better than the illiteracy of the indigenous, that actually damages the brain. It actually is a form of artificial intelligence. And as we learn at very early ages, in the arrogance of the Western mind, we actually shape our brain in such a way that we lose the capacity to access directly the real world. And by losing that access through the natural way that as human beings coming out of the wombs we have, as he said, studies show that virtually every child is born a genius. And through the socialization process, through the trauma of socialization, through the imbuing of the young being with the literacy of the word rather than the world, we actually distract ourselves and make our lives full of suffering because we can't get back to who we really are. And that was very profound, particularly for me. I'm, one of the most educated people you'll meet, and I realized just how illiterate I actually am. So I just wanted to share that with you, that these programs that we do every day impact me greatly. And today we're deepening that discussion because we're going to hear from someone who, like our two previous sessions and the speakers, has really journeyed deeply from the world of the word and literacy and science and technology back into the world of natural indigenous knowing. And this is particularly a privilege for me because as a young man, I was very influenced and have been in my whole life by the account of Carlos Castaneda. I remember when his books came out in the 60s and 70s, I literally devoured them. And what he, as a PhD student at UCLA, thinking that he knew, going down into Juarez, Mexico, and a little town, and being encountered by a man, Don Juan Matus, who blew him away, and through the years of training showed Carlos that what he thought he knew was leading him away from what he most essentially needed to know to be an authentic human being and an impeccable warrior. And that inspired me to go on a pathway that has led to where I am now. So it's in that spirit of this general discussion that we're having about consciousness and how we access the very intelligence that has shaped the entire universe and forms who and what we are, that I want to introduce HeatherAsh Amara, who's been studying Toltec spirituality for several decades. She's written a number of books. She studied with great Toltec teachers that she will tell us about. She's also a firewalker. You talk about consciousness. Consider walking on a bed of hot coals and not being burnt. That's like healing your knee. It's like regaining your eyesight. So the possibilities of consciousness are before us all the time. And it's our lack of appreciation of that constitutes the essence of our predicament. So HeatherAsh, I want to thank you for who you are and everything that you're doing to bring these deep spiritual teachings into the world. And welcome to Humanity Rising. She's been on before, and HeatherAsh will open our session with a meditation and then make a presentation on Toltec spirituality. And then when she's complete, then we'll have a dialogue for the balance of the time. But HeatherAsh, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Jim. So good to be back here at Humanity Rising. It sounds like it's been quite a week. So grateful to be part of all the transformation that's happening. So if you can go ahead and close your eyes and bring one hand to your heart and one hand to your belly. Let's take a moment on this digital realm to bring ourselves fully into our bodies. Taking a breath, so as you inhale, you feel your chest rising and your belly rising. And as you exhale, pull the belly back towards the spine and exhale all the way out. Exhale, long exhale. And when you inhale, relax the belly. Inhale fully. And exhale. And one more time. Mindful breath into chest and belly. And then visualize the sun rising. A beautiful ceremony that you can do physically. But for now, imagine the sun rising and that you're standing, seeing the full horizon as the sun comes up. And take your hands from your heart and your belly and go ahead and just spread your arms wide and open your heart to that sun rising. I know we're all in different places around the world. Just imagine that we're connecting with that cycle of the sun rising and falling, opening our hearts. And imagine that you can gather a little bit of that sun and then bring it back into your heart and your belly. And so as we step into our session today, as we step into the sacred circle of consciousness, of healing, of wisdom, we honor the ancestors, the ones that came before us. We honor the cycles of life and death. We honor all the ones that walked before us and all the ones that will walk after us. Blessed be. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. I've been incredibly blessed to be at the confluence of many different modes of thinking, perceiving, experiencing. I was raised in Southeast Asia, traveled all over the world as a child. And I remember as one of my youngest memories looking out the window as we drove, we were in Hong Kong, I think at that time, and seeing people in the parks praying to the rocks, taking incense, and I could feel their energy as they would hold the incense and then lovingly place it at the rock. I saw people talking to trees in the mornings and doing Tai Chi practices together or alone. And I knew I could feel that connection with the natural world, with the human realm, with the ancestral realm in my bones, but I was always looking at it through a window, literally traveling by a car or on the bus. And there were many times when I was able, my parents took us, my parents were wonderful. When I was 7, they took my sister and I to the Kali Ghats, to the Ghats in Varanasi. And so as a young girl, I was watching bodies burn and be put into the Ganges and the prayer. And so there was this, again, recognition of the cycles. We went to the Kali Ghat where they were doing animal sacrifices and deep, deep prayers. And again, I saw this cycle of death and rebirth, of life feeding life. And when I came to the United States to go to college, I went to UC Davis. And I remember the first day registering for classes, knowing in my being something is terribly wrong here. Something is so, I felt disconnected. I felt everyone around me was disconnected. I remember seeing a woman that was wearing a hijab and was in line, one of the very few women of color. And my heart was wanting to run over to her and grab her, of help me find my way back home. Because I knew that other cultures had this deep connection with the divine immanent in everything. And that what I was about to embark in of going to university was going to take me away from that. And it did, of course, as all of us go into study, we start being removed more and more from our knowing, our deep connection to what the Toltec call silent knowledge. And we start putting more and more of our attention into the scholarly, which can help us understand and can also help us remove. But I was really blessed because I was curious and I was feisty, and I created my own major. So I created a major that was called International Community Development. And what I studied was international relations and how whole global systems work together, and how one thing happening on one part of the world can affect people on a completely different part of the world. So I saw the larger web of government, social systems, nonprofits, and how everything is connected in the big picture. And I also studied community development. And so I also learned how we as humans in small local areas can affect great change that also affects the global. And at the same time, I started studying different spiritual traditions. So I started my journey studying European shamanism because my lineage is from France and Scotland. So I started with, what were my people up to? What were my people up to pre-Christianity? Where was the earth-based connection? And part of what inspired that was I remember going to a Catholic wedding and being like, this is all pagan ceremony. And so that got me really curious. So I started there, European shamanic traditions, and I started studying at teaching at UC Davis. So I taught Wicca at UC Davis for many, many years. But I knew that something was missing, that my lineage, that my people, that the break between the connection to the earth and what happened when the church and medicine and knowledge came in was so eradicated that there were very important pieces I knew that I was missing in my learning. And I had not brain learning, in my body learning, in my knowledge. I could feel the gap. And so I opened my being and I prayed and I asked and I said, dearest spirit, I don't know what I need, but I'm open. I'm willing. I'm willing for whatever the next step is for me. And not too long after that prayer and that opening into what's next, I had a dream about a man. And in my dream, this human was standing in front of me, and I felt this immense love and this is it. Yes. Yes. And I knew that was my next study. And I woke up and I remember waking up thinking, right, where's a white girl in Northern California going to meet this really powerful guy, shamanic guy? And a week later, someone came into my office and said, oh my God, you have to meet this man. My whole body went, oh no, I am not ready for what's about to happen. I could tell my life was going to be irrevocably changed. And it took me a year to get ready. And a year after that, I met Don Miguel Ruiz, who's the author of the Four Agreements. This was before he had written the Four Agreements. This was in 1992. He was traveling between Sacramento, Los Angeles, and Santa Fe every month. And he started an apprenticeship the next month. And I stepped in and committed fully to apprenticing with him and a small group of about 40 of us that traveled with him for the next 7 years. So Toltec wisdom is based out of South and Central Mexico. And the Toltec are very unusual in the way that they deepened into their understanding of consciousness and of the world, because what they were able to do is look at how we are energetically, how we are in relationship with the world energetically. And what the Toltec recognized is that all of us are dreaming all of the time. That because of the ways we make up stories, the ways that we create reality in our head through what we learn, we basically drop a filter over our eyes and we start filtering the world through what we know, which means we don't see other realities. We don't see other ways of perceiving. We say there's this way, and we don't even realize we're dropping these lenses of perception over our eyes. And that film, we can say, is what the Toltec call the smoky mirror. The smoke is the stories that we've learned, the agreements, the ways that our attention gets fixated on this is the way the world is. And again, when we have that smoky mirror, when we have the smoke in front of the mirror, we don't see clearly. Our perception is hooked, and what we call our assemblage point gets fixed, and gets fixed within a very limited range of perception. So as I studied with Don Miguel, as I learned these ancient ways of perceiving energy and really getting out of the head and into the body and into energy. And when I talk about perceiving energy, I'm not just talking about seeing energy, though that is one form of perceiving energy. There are many ways of perceiving energy with our body, with our ears, through sound, through smell, through a knowing in our being, through sight. So we're learning how to open our perception back up again. And that is what I studied for and still study many, many decades. And also how to open up the window of our perception so that we can start to consciously take our perception, grab our assemblage point. And our assemblage point is where we assemble reality. It's where we limit reality, to be able to take it and move it to different points so that we can be in relationship with the world fully, not through just one lens, but through many lenses. And there's no better or worse. There is differences. And, as what's been happening with this week in Humanity Rising, from what I just talked with Jim earlier, is that there's this understanding that is opening, that we are coming back home to our indigenous way of perceiving the world, that we must come back home to direct experience and being open to learning in new ways, not just through our mind. That is incredibly limited. But it also doesn't mean we need to throw the mind out. We need to recognize the mind is a tool like any other tool. And that as we get more grounded in all the ways that we can perceive, that we're able to use that tool and then let it go and open into what is needed here, what is needed at this time. So today I want to share about a couple different pieces. One is around Teotihuacan, Mexico. So one of the places that I first studied with Miguel was down in Mexico, and Teotihuacan is considered the heart of the Toltec. There's a huge pyramid complex there, and there is a path of initiation through that pyramid complex that is ancient. Those pyramids were built about 100 BC, were abandoned about 200. And there's a long history of that place, and my dates are wrong, so I'm sorry, my brain is scrambled because I'm going into the energy, so I'll get you the specific dates. But this is part of what happens when we're on those two realms, is that when you go into the energy, you start losing the logical. Will and I used to laugh about this a lot. So my dear friend Will Tagle, who brought me into Ubiquity, we taught at Teotihuacan for many, many years, and he would hold the scholarly part and all the book knowledge, and I would hold the energetic bridge to the place. So that is still true. And if Will was here, he'd be giving you the exact dates and times. So this place of Teotihuacan is an energetic center for raising consciousness, for challenging the limitations and the places that our perception is stuck or brittle, and helping us to be in relationship with life in a very different way. And it was crafted as that, and that energy is still there thousands of years later. So I want to talk a little bit about the teachings and the wisdom of Teotihuacan and share a story to start with, a couple stories. So the first story is when I knew that I was going to go to Teotihuacan the first time with Don Miguel, and I dreamt myself there before I went there physically. I think the trip was about 2 months out, and I became lucid in the middle of the night, and my energy body was awake, and I popped up and I felt myself being pulled towards this place that I'd never been. And I knew I was going to Teotihuacan. I knew that the place was calling me and pulling me. And I got about halfway there energetically, and I was like, I should check with Miguel. Like, I don't know if it's okay for me to go here by myself. So I literally stopped my energy body, went and found Miguel. Like, my conscious mind didn't know how to do this, of course, but my being knew how to do this. Went and found Miguel, and Miguel, I'm going to Teo, is that okay? And he looks at me in the dream body and he just starts laughing, and he's like, okay, sweetie, go, of course, go. And that's one thing that's so precious about really good guides, is that they encourage you to do direct experience. In that moment, Miguel taught me so much, and there's so many moments where it wasn't a direct teaching moment, it was a energetic interaction where a download happened in my being that took me then years to unpack later. So knowing I can go have direct experiences. I don't need to experience this place through someone else. I can be in relationship with it. Then I traveled over the pyramids and introduced myself and said hello. And the place was introduced to me before I ever went. So this place has been in my heart for 30 years. And I've been going 2 to 4 times a year since then, sometimes 6 times a year, as my pilgrimage to deepening into levels of consciousness. And every time I go to Teotihuacan, every time people are like, well, don't you get bored going down there? No, it's a university. It was designed as a university. And all the wisdom and information is in the rocks, is in the land, is with the ancestors there. There's an incredible generosity of sharing when you go to that place, and of direct connection that happens. And every time I go, I get rewired in a new way. There's a new piece that comes in. There's a deeper understanding in my bones. There's more love that comes through my being. There's more letting go of the ways that I've been westernized that don't serve me, of the ways that even though I wasn't raised in a religious, was raised in Buddhist culture, there's still many of the agreements in what we call the dream of the planet that I still am shedding, that all of us are shedding. So just to talk about that for a moment, because I think that's an important piece for us to digest, is that there's something that the Toltec perceive we call the dream of the planet. And it's an overarching energy about how most humans dream. Yeah, and it's a dream of the planet. And that dream is based, if you look at 5 o'clock news, when we had 5 o'clock news, 5 o'clock news are main newspapers, what gets fed back to us is fear. Thanks, Catherine. It's not Chichen Itza, that's a Mayan temple, Diana. It is Teotihuacan, Mexico. It's 45 minutes outside of Mexico City. I'll write the name down, Teotihuacan. And the word, this is not the original name, like many of these places, this is not the original name of the city. It is the name that the Aztecs gave it. The Aztecs came later and were so astonished at what they found that they called it the place where humans become divine. So that's what Teotihuacan means, the place where humans become divine. Okay. Yeah, so it's about 45 minutes outside of Mexico City. And yeah, isn't that great? And the word Toltec, this is also great. The word Toltec means artist of the spirit. And the understanding is that we're waking up from the dream of the planet. And the dream of the planet right now, it has not always been this way. And this is not true with indigenous people that are still deeply indigenous, that haven't been touched by the West, are outside of the dream. And they're looking at it being like, whoa, people, that's not healthy. Like what you heard yesterday, that's not healthy. But most of us are in this dream that is based in fear and scarcity. And literally, when we're born as physical beings, we're energetic beings. And as energetic beings, we take on the dream of the planet. That becomes woven into our being, is the current dream, because that dream of the planet comes through the light. I'm going to go a little esoteric on you. The Toltec believe that light carries information. Surprise, science is finding the same thing. And this is so true about so many of the indigenous teachings, is that science is catching up with what the shamans and the healers and the midwives and the ones connected to the earth have always known. So when we're born, the moment that you open your eyes and the light hits your eyes, the light goes into your pineal gland, and the information of the current dream of the planet is downloaded into your being. Now, there's parts of that that are incredibly helpful. So we know how to be human in relationship with other humans. So this isn't all bad at all. It's part of us coming into being in the human realm and knowing how to navigate the human realm. And it's also incredibly damaging, because right now the current dream, and the dream has not always been fear and scarcity. We're in what we call the sixth sun, which is a new awakening. The fifth sun was very much about fear and scarcity. In the Toltec mythology, the sixth sun, the teachings start coming back. And in fact, in 1968/69, Carlos Castaneda brought forward the teachings of Don Juan. I have to share this because this is the original book that came out from the University of Los Angeles. This was the first book of the Castaneda series. And when he met Don Juan said, "You're the one, you are going to write about this. Go forth." And so the Toltec teachings that had gone underground once the Spanish invaded Mexico, the Toltec teachings had gone underground. They started coming back up again, as was prophesied with the sixth sun, through the work of Carlos Castaneda, sharing the teachings of Don Juan. My teacher, Don Miguel, was also prophesied that he would be the one to bring the Toltec lineage forward in his family. His family is part of what's called the Eagle Knight lineage, that is, they can go back to the invasion of the Spanish. And his family consciously made the decision, like all of the priests and priestesses, to put the information underground and only teach one-on-one. When Miguel was born as the 13th of 13 children to Mother Sarita, who was an incredible curandera and healer and holder of the Toltec lineage, she knew that he would be the one to carry the lineage into the world, that he was going to be the one that was going to bring it from teaching small groups within the family to the world. And in fact, that is exactly what happened with, I love that I have props with this book, with the 4 agreements. So these 2 books were breaking thousands of years of silence, or hundreds of years of silence, and bringing it back, the teachings back into the world. And since then, there's been many other Toltec teachers and Toltec wisdom that has come forward. I'm really dedicated to bringing the Toltec wisdom and the energy through in a female body, because there's a different way that I metabolize the teachings than I've seen that Miguel as a man and other male teachers that I've seen metabolize it. So that is part of my mission and purpose, is to weave the Toltec teachings with what I've learned about the emotional body, the cycles and seasons and connection to the earth. Yeah. And just what it's like being in a female body or a non-male body in these times, as we're learning to reconnect with women's wisdom, which is different. And also as important as reconnecting with the indigenous wisdom. All right. Hi, Mary. So, Dream of the Planet. We're learning how to become artists of the spirit, to step out of the dream of fear and scarcity, and to step into unconditional love, presence, opening to contradictions, being stable during chaos, having deep compassion. I really know that the Toltec teachings are critical at these times, that the reason that they've come back into the world is that as indigenous teachings are rising from a power spot in Mexico, where the teachings were birthed, that just like all indigenous wisdom around the world, the wisdom comes from a deep connection to the earth and a capacity to perceive energy and be in connected consciousness with life. That's where the teachings emerge from. And that is what we're learning how to go back to. And we don't have to let go of the scientific or the logical. We just have to understand it's very limited. And instead of what we often do, which is I'm going to hold the concept of the Western linear mind, and I'm going to put the indigenous wisdom inside, we want to actually flip it completely, that we're holding a new level, which is an old level of consciousness, an old way of consciousness, so that that becomes our base and that logic is held within that. That's what Teotihuacan helps us to do. It helps us to rewire our being so that we are connected back again. We're woven back into different levels of consciousness and able to learn from the rocks, learn from the ancestors, learn from our own silent knowledge and connection to the wisdom that is held. And we're in a very, very special time right now in relationship to Teotihuacan as well. And this is the second story that I want to share, and then we'll open up for questions in a moment. So about 13 years ago now, there was a huge rainstorm in Teotihuacan. And Teotihuacan was when it was built, it was an honoring of water. And the people, they call them the Teotihuacanos. The people at that time, the originators of the Toltec wisdom, they honored water in all different forms. Water is rain. Tlaloc was the god of rain. There was the goddess of the lakes. There was the goddess, there's all of these different embodiments of water and reverence towards water in all its forms. And that's actually what the pyramids were built for, was an honoring of the deep importance of water in our lives and all the different forms of water. And then there were also teachers and apprentices there were people that living there, but there was also a lot of ceremony and initiation and apprenticeship that was happening there as well. That's still in the site. So about 12 years ago, huge rainstorm, and this crack opened up. Jim, this is the story I've been wanting to tell you. That's so good. This crack opened up in the place that we lovingly call hell. It's what we call the dream of the planet. It's a manifestation of the dream of the planet and the energy of chaos. So this crack opens, and the people that were working there called the archaeologist, and we're like, we don't know what this is. And the archaeologist, his name's Sergio, looked and he's like, all right, drop me in. So they tied a rope around his waist and they lowered him down into this crevice, which went down 60 feet into the earth. And he said he was terrified. He didn't, it was pitch black. He didn't know how far, he didn't know where it was going to. So he finally hits ground and looks around, and there's nothing there. It's a wall. He's in this crevice and there's nothing around. But then he looks up and he sees this tiny crack about an inch at the top, and he realizes it's a wall. So they end up building robots to go in. I'm going to cut to the chase because I could talk about this forever. I love this story so much. What they discovered is that there were multiple walls that were consciously built that had offerings, 100,000 offerings between the walls. And there's something like 7 walls before you get to the main cavern. And that when they were excavating, all of the world was like, oh my God, this is so exciting. We're going to find the king's tomb. We're going to understand Teotihuacan. We're going to understand everything by finding the king. I love this. Men, I love you, men, but sometimes you get really limited. So they get into the center, and what they find as they get into the actual tunnel that goes under the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, and Quetzalcoatl is the smallest pyramid. Quetzalcoatl is the feathered serpent. So it's the connection of the earth with the sky. So the snake, which is connected to the earth with the wings with the sky. And what they find is a replica of the upper world. So there's carved into the stone are mountains. There's rivers and lakes that are made out of mercury. There is glitter, what they call prehistoric glitter of magnetite, hematite, and some other metal that I'm not remembering right now, that was coated so that it glittered as you walked in. And when they got to the center, there was nothing. It was this huge, vast open space. And they were like, what is this? And then they realized there were 4 carvings. There were 3 women that were in full regalia. And there was 1 smaller male figure that was undressed. So they probably think it was probably a younger male. And all of them were at a particular angle where they were all looking at one point. It was exact. They were all looking at one point. And when they measured everything, they realized that that was the point that dropped exactly through the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl. It was the center axis mundi, down into that one point that they were looking at and down into the earth. And that this was that what they call the axis mundi, which was the connection between the underworld, the middle world, and the upper world. So, surprise, Teotihuacan was probably actually created by female shamans that were training this young one. So they still, it's a complete mystery still. And the archaeology, Sergio, like it completely changed his life to discover these 3 figures. And I first went and met them. The first place that they were toured, we could say, is in the San Francisco de Young. And so the first day that tour opened and they had brought all the statues there, I was in line. I was like first in line. This was part of my PhD as well. So I'm like, I need to meet these women because they're part of my PhD. And it was really interesting because 2 of the female statues were there and the little male, but one of them was missing. And I was like, where's the third shaman? Like, where is she? And I spent hours in front of these 2 statues. And then I was really blessed because obviously somebody that was getting a tour by the main curator of the show, she was walking them through, and I heard her saying, yeah, at the last minute, the archaeologist wouldn't send the 3rd statue. He refused to send her. And my heart broke open because I was like, oh my gosh, he gets it. He gets it. And that statue is still she's still in the tunnel. He hasn't let her leave because he knows she's holding the energy there. Yeah, exactly. She's holding the energy. She's holding the space. So yes, I share that story because we can think that we know a place, a sacred place, and yet there's always more to uncover. And like that was a big uncovering of the feminine principle, the feminine wisdom, and the understanding that there was much more going on there than we comprehend is rising, is coming up. And that we need to listen, and we need to go back into the earth. We need to go back into the darkness to incubate, to gestate, to listen. I feel like that is what we have lost, is that we're so sky oriented and like climb the pyramid and connect to the sun and intellect. We're up here constantly, and it's time for us to come through and down, all the way down into the earth again, to listen to that wisdom. Teotihuacan is one of those places. There's many places. The same when I went to Chartres, I was really blessed to go to Chartres last year for the first time. And when we went down to the lower church and I saw the well, I couldn't leave. I literally was like, I cannot, this is my spot. I must be here. I must let the energy of this place infuse me, because I knew that's where the sacred actually was. Yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah. Shannon, I've been underneath. I haven't yet held her. I haven't yet visited her, but I will. I'm waiting for the time. I have lots of friends who have visited her, which is how I know. Yeah, exactly. And all, here's the thing, sweethearts, too, about all sacred places around the world. If there's a church built on top of it, there is a sacred spring or grove or old connected site beneath it. All of them. I think probably no exceptions. So we can use these places as portals to the past, whether it's Teotihuacan, whether it's Chart, whether it is another, like your local. I am deeply devoted to Guadalupe. From all of my time in Mexico, Guadalupe is the manifestation of Tonantzin, who is the traditional earth goddess there. There's a whole other story. Maybe I'll come on another Humanity Rising, and or maybe it's already been talked about, but just the intersection and the power of what happened with Guadalupe and Tonantzin of saving her people, of actually saving the indigenous people from the Spanish killing everybody. And so we can tap into this anywhere. You don't need to go to sacred sites. It's on the land that you live. And sacred sites are often where ley lines and where energy has come together. And there's two things that happens. There's already a natural energy, rock formation, sacred rock formation, grove, well, or spring that is there, that is bringing earth energy and wisdom up through for the people. They're portals. And there's also then often thousands of years of devotion, of human devotion. And that is also healing. That is also a pathway to different levels of consciousness, is tapping into the devotion and the presence and the opening of consciousness that gets imbued in all of these places from the human realm. So we have the earth realm and the divine realm coming together, as well as the human realm as well. When we come to these sacred places, we want to come, and again, whether that sacred place is your backyard or a place like Teotihuacan or Chartres, that we come with reverence. We come with honor for the ones that walked before us, understanding they are some of our best teachers. They don't have to be your blood ancestors to have reverence for the ones that came before. Doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily talk to you, but the reverence allows an opening with our connection to the earth. So the land that I am on right now, I am on the land of the Kewa people. And there's actually a sacred cave right, 100 yards from where I am, that has pottery shards. This land was deeply, deeply revered. I'm at a friend's house right now. It's called the Garden of the Goddess, south of Santa Fe. And this whole area is still deeply wounded by the genocide of the indigenous people here, and also still very alive. So we get to learn how to move through with love the trauma that is in all of these sacred places, as well as the wisdom that's there. And for me, it's learning how to hold the grief and recognize and honor what happened in these places on a human realm, so to not bypass that or ignore that, to hold it with love and compassion and understand that there's trauma that we're also in the process as a culture of metabolizing, and that there's also the deep wisdom that we can access by getting quiet, by learning how to get still, by learning how to stop thinking, and to rest in that there's so many other ways of perceiving. And when we constantly let ourselves get hooked by the dream, and right now the dream is manifesting so beautifully, like, damn, is it good, in all the ways that our attention is being hooked through social media, through politics, through all of those things. And we need to keep lovingly disconnecting and dropping back into our own silent knowledge and then bridging. There's a difference when we're, let me see if I can explain this energetically. There's a difference around how we can affect change when, if we're immersed in the logical thinking, I have to figure this out. And then from that paradigm, we drop into stillness, or we have a meditation practice, or we do ritual or ceremony. And that we're trying to translate this into this. Versus when we flip and we let our base and our being come from silent knowledge, come from stillness, come from not knowing. I would say the two deepest things I learned from Don Miguel was of letting go of everything I thought I knew. And that took decades to get to a place of really, truly emptiness and I don't know. And not from fear and not from like false humility, but really like, I don't trust or believe anything, but from a deep place of love. One of the fifth agreement is be skeptical, but learn to listen. So it's not like, I don't believe anything. It's just, I know in my bones, there are so many ways to perceive that there's no way I could understand or control or think that there was one way that was right. So as I've digested and metabolized the body energetic learning that I've gotten over the decades, to then ground that into the earth where I'm at and open into stillness, then I'm able to use this realm as a tool and understand it is also important, but it's not the foundation of my being. And I think that is the flip that we're in consciousness right now in relationship to humanity, is that we get to learn, and it takes decades, this is a long process, how to undo those old modes of being so that we can get back to the foundational ways of being, the ancient ways of being. Yeah. So, exactly, we are playing the long game. Yeah, I'm definitely in for the long game, however long it takes. That we need more love. We need more unconditional love in the world, on the planet. We need more, or not. I don't know. I've just sat here and lectured about how there's so many ways of being. So there's also this being with what is arising and listening for where's the place that we can be fully radiant expressions of life in our way, and that each of us is going to have something that we're called to, and that there isn't a right way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So, questions, places you'd like to hear more about, shares.
Thank you, HeatherAsh. Brilliantly put. And it opens up so many areas of inquiry and dialogue. I'd like to start with a comment that you made about yourself as a woman metabolizing the Toltec teachings and spirituality in a particularly feminine way. And I wanted to just open that domain up further, because I know you've done training programs on the warrior goddess. That was the name of one of your best-selling books. And you've really focalized your energy on the way that women in particular can access and metabolize this particular teaching. And of course, it's against the backdrop of what Don Juan said to Carlos that actually men have the tougher challenge because they're so locked into the verbal and the logical and the rational, and that women much more naturally and easily can become the sorcerers, as he called them, with a mastery that men have to strive a lot longer and harder to achieve. So speak more about that, because, you know, when we talk about the rise of indigenous wisdom around the world and the rise of the Toltec, it's also coinciding with the liberation of women. There are a lot of factors that are percolating up through the dreaming of the earth to assist us in redeeming ourselves that are conflating and coming together. And you're pulling some very interesting and important strands together through your work.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I love that question so much. So in my world, I'd say, and this was right as before I wrote Warrior Goddess Training, I had a pivotal time in my life when I went through a really, really difficult divorce. And it was my teaching partner, my husband, my business partner, like everything unraveled in my life in a really epic way. And I remember at that time, I felt this fork. And the fork was represented by, on one hand, I literally called Miguel up one day, and I've called him 3 times in my life of knowing him for 30 years. And I called him and I was like, I don't know how to do this. Or I think maybe I saw him. I think I was with him. And he does, oh, sweetheart, he doesn't love you. No, just move on. He doesn't love you anymore. It's okay. Just move on. And my entire community as well. I had trained, hundreds of people in the Toltec teachings. And there was a big chunk of my community that was the same thing, that was like, just move on. Like, don't, like this, they couldn't handle the amount of heartbreak that I was navigating. And I was like, you know what? I could do this. I could Toltec the hell out of this, of like override my emotional body and see this is a dream. And I can be my warrior and I can keep going. I could do that. And I looked at I stepped back and I looked at the energy of it. And I realized if I did that, I could have done that. I had enough energy. I have a lot of energy and a lot of capacity. But if I used my energy in that way to stop what was happening in my body, to stop my emotions, and to do the full-on warrior, an incredible opportunity. That there was something else that was wanting to be birthed through me that wasn't through the warrior path. And I had to trust myself. And it was incredibly scary, because what I was trusting myself to do was to go into grief and pain, and my emotional body, which from a teacher point of view, I didn't want to do that. It would have been way easier to be like, yes, things happen, life happens, things change, we move on. I couldn't do it, or I didn't want to do it. I should say I didn't want to do it. So I let my heart break. I went into 2 years of immense grief, of being really lost, of being really scared, and of teaching. I taught my way through it. Jim, you knew me then. I was still teaching my way through it, but I was letting myself disintegrate through the process and just trusting my instinct and my knowing that there was something else that wanted to be birthed through me. And what happened is, because I was willing to go into the dark, into the unknown, into my emotional body, that I was able to see that all the places in my life that I'd shut myself down, all the places where I had decided logic, like I would just logic over the emotion, where I would spiritually bypass what was actually going on for me. And I went through and I recapitulated and I undid all of it. And I came out the other side a different human. The depth of the compassion that was there, of the love, of the presence, of the being able to be with others that were in grief, completely shifted. So that's what, and out of that, Warrior Goddess was born. And it was bringing the goddess, honoring the cycles, honoring grief. And indigenous peoples, like, they don't pretend that like something dies and they're not like, well, okay. They don't intellectualize it. They go in and through. And that's what, for me, is part of, it's not all of it, but that's part of what I am working to bring through, is that idea of let's go through rather than over.
And that's at the heart of your Warrior Goddess training.
Definitely at the heart of the Warrior Goddess training. And also, interesting enough, just to bridge this, also at the heart of the firewalking. So I've been firewalking. I started doing, I went to my first firewalk, I think in '89, and it just completely changed my life with my mentor, Peggy Dillon. And Peggy and I still teach together and are really, really close. And she brings a very female-oriented relationship to the fire. And I was mentioning there's a little bit of a split. Well, most people, when they think about firewalking, they think about Tony Robbins, right? Tony Robbins was trained by the same people that trained me. All of us were trained by, I mean, there's now children, we can say, but if you go back to the grandparents of Western firewalking movement, it's Peggy Dillon, Tali Burkhan. And there's the very, in relationship to firewalking, there's a very more masculine, it's motivation. You just raise your energy and you cross it once and you can show that you're strong, which is powerful. Like, I'm not dissing that, because that it changes people's lives, right? And then there's also this feminine, which is we stand around the fire and chant and respect deeply the fire and do ceremony and understand that what we're learning how to do is raise our energy to match the energy of the fire, and that it's about communing with what is, not pretending it's not there. Sometimes, and this is kind of old school firewalking, it's like, just pretend it's popcorn and you'll get through. And what we're always saying is, don't pretend like it's popcorn, it's fire. Be in relationship to the fire and ask the fire to teach you how to dance with it. It's a communion. So there's also this place where we're learning how to be in relationship with challenges, of not power through the challenges. Sometimes that's necessary, but not all the time. But to actually allow the challenges to change us so that we can meet them in a new way.
It's interesting that both perspectives seem to work.
Yes.
How do you understand that?
How I understand that is this. Fear works. Fear is an incredible motivator. It works, right? But I think of fear like sugar. Sugar does this, and then it crashes. Fear is the same way. If you use fear to motivate yourself over and over again, or if you use like the power over, I can dominate this over and over again, it works in the short run. It does not work in the long run. It has incredible consequences on the body. And that's what we're seeing in the world now, is that because we're no longer in relationship and we have this, I just can power over it, it works for a while, but the consequences are immense. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the firewalking, just since you've been so deeply immersed in it. How do you understand the phenomenon of walking on fire, whether to overcome or to go through? What is actually happening such that the person doesn't get burnt?
Magic. So it's a combo of science and magic. But here's the thing. From the science realm, there's been a lot of study around firewalking. And you'll see, if you type in firewalking, you'll see inevitably there's pictures of physicists with their physics books going, it's just physics walking across the coals. And what the physics says is there's two theories, theory of conductivity and the Leidenfrost theory. And I'll just share the Leidenfrost theory just for one of them, is that when you walk on fire, your feet sweat and the coals have protective ashes, and therefore you can walk safely across the coals. And there's all sorts of ways that we as firewalkers have been like, this doesn't hold up at all. When you go back, yeah, and I can share all sorts of stories about why it holds. Let me just share one. This is one of my favorites. There was a man named Steve Biziak who loved expanding the understanding of firewalking, and he watched women in India, because firewalking is a phenomenon that happens in all cultures around the world.
Yeah.
He watched women in India walking across the coals with their saris dragging on the coals behind them. And sari material is incredibly thin and incredibly flammable. So he was like, how is this possible? So when he came back to the States, he did an experiment where he put pantyhose on and walked across 1,500 degree coals. And his feet were fine. Pantyhose did not ignite. So that's beyond science. And I can tell you hundreds of stories like that around firewalking. So when we go back to the indigenous wisdom around firewalking, we go back to the Kung people in South Africa. Kung. The Kung are master firewalkers, and it's the shamans of the tribes that do the firewalking. And they will put coals in their mouth, they'll roll in the coals, they'll rub coals on their friends, part of this all night long ritual ceremony. And what happens at the end of the ceremony, incredible book called Ropes to God, is that the shamans then go into their community and do hands-on healing. So they take the energy from the fire and they bring it into their being, and then they bring it to their community. That is classic shamanic wisdom. You commune with the elements, with the ancestors, and then you bring it to your community. So what the Kung believe is that what you're doing is matching your Noom. They don't have a word for energy. They don't have a word for love. They don't have a word for fear. What you're doing is you're raising your Noom to match the Noom of the fire. The closest translation we have is energy. So what you're doing is you're raising your energy, connection, emotion. Problem to be afraid. Use the fear. It's not a problem to be overjoyed. Use the joy to commune and meet the fire, and then you can cross safely. And I can say I've been burned many times. I've done a lot of experiments. Made a lot of mistakes. I'm really stubborn. I can tell you fire is the best teacher, because there is no, I think you get one period of grace, and then after that, the fire's like, you and me, we're on.
Yeah. When you're in the middle. Yeah.
And that really holds up. The times that I have been kissed by the fire are really, there's been a couple of times I've gotten myself in lots of pain, has been because I thought I can do this, or I should be going first. I have to it's the place I put myself in the middle from my mind rather than my body and my knowing and something larger leading, being led across the cold. So,
Well, let's talk a little bit about healing, because I think there's a connection between this resonance and that you're speaking about in terms of communing with the fire, and what we've been hearing over the last couple of days about healing as in some ways a byproduct of the capacity of each and every one of us as individuals to align our energy with the larger energy, whether it's the energy of the fire or the energy of cosmic consciousness. There's something that happens when the individual opens oneself to the larger energetic kind of undifferentiated consciousness that holds everything together and infuses everything. So speak to us about the Toltec orientation and in some ways the technology of Toltec healing. How does that
Yeah.
work in your tradition?
How it works is this. Thank you. Such a beautiful question. Is that there are two planes that we're dancing in, put it that way. There's what we call the Nagual. And the Nagual is that unmanifested, undifferentiated, we can say divine. That's, we put that word on top of it, but it's the unmanifest. And then there's the tonal, and the tonal is the manifestation. It's where the form drops out of unform, unmanifested, undifferentiated potential. And there's a beautiful scene in one of the Castaneda books, I'm sure you remember it, where I think they're at the airport and Carlos is saying, okay, I don't understand, like the tonal. So like the salt shaker is the tonal. And Don Juan's like, yes, that's the salt shaker. He's like, okay. So, okay, I got it. God is the Nagual. And he's like, nope. You name something, it's tonal.
Mm.
The moment you put something into form, even in your consciousness, it's now dropped into the tonal. We cannot conceive of the Nagual, we can experience it. And this is all wisdom traditions talk about this. Of you have the experience, and then we're all trying to explain the experience, but it's unexplainable. You have to have it yourself. So the healing for me, in my experience, is that what we're learning how to do is understand that there's a relationship with the tonal and the Nagual. They're actually not separate. The Nagual is actually woven through everything. And that at any moment you can step out of the tonal into the Nagual, into the undifferentiated and unmanifest. And that's where the healing can happen. And then step back in. And that's why things can happen like that. I remember when I read David Bohm, that there was one, and again, I don't often grasp things, I just see the energy of them, but there was one thing that he was talking about how everything's dropping into the unmanifest so fast we don't realize it. And I was like, yes, tonal Nagual. And so it's about shifting our capacity away from this can't be healed and opening into possibility. And in the possibility, it may be that it's not going to heal this lifetime, and that's not a big deal either. So, I think sometimes in spiritual tradition, we get into this idea of like, if I'm able to heal whatever it is, then I'm good. And then it proves that I'm a good human, or that I've done it right. No, there's some things that can't be healed. And that's not a problem in the Toltec world, because we don't consider like having like if you have MS, then you're doing something wrong. It's just, that's what you're navigating, and that's going to be your teacher. What we call a petty tyrant, that we have humans that are petty tyrants. You can't control other people. And there's going to be particular things in our bodies that can't be healed in the way we think. Healing is not necessarily the body healing in the way our mind thinks it. There's all sorts of possibilities for healing. That might mean you die. But is there healing in the process of the dying? That's what we're more interested in. I don't know if I'm saying that clearly. I get all excited.
No. It's pointing to some of the complexities that we all face, and if you think of the placebo effect, and people have this remarkable capacity to heal, but the next person, whatever their intention, can't pull it off at all. And that's a real mystery of healing in relationship to consciousness and the personality and the intent. There's no one size fits all in this business.
Absolutely. And that's one thing I really appreciate about Toltec wisdom is it's always being in relationship with what is rather than what we think should be. And so sometimes you heal in the traditional way, and sometimes you don't. And there's no good or bad or right or wrong. It's we really show up with what is. And one of the biggest arguments I've ever had around Toltec wisdom, I thought this was hilarious. I was teaching in Scotland, and talking about this, the Toltec, and this one gentleman raised his hand and he's like, well, we all know that the Toltec perceived energy better than anybody, and they were able to map the universe and that they know the right way. And I looked at him and I'm like, I'm thinking he must be kidding. Like, who is this guy? And I realized he was completely serious. The Toltec were the best and the only. No other society ever had reached the levels of the Toltec. And we got into this little bit of an argument because I come from a tradition that everything is a pathway to freedom. Everything is a pathway to freedom. Challenges, beauty, like everything you use towards your freedom. And then I was watching this man limit himself of like, this is the only way.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that's so fun in our relationship with each other and humans, that we want to continue to explore and expand. And, you know, it's a daily practice. I definitely am constantly like, oops, undo that agreement. Oops, reset that. Because it's so easy for us to get hooked and to start collapsing energetically. And it's a daily, moment by moment practice to open back up into possibilities.
Well, this leads into another domain of consciousness, also healing, which is emphasized by Don Juan, and that is the relationship between perception and intent. You know, that because we are assemblages of energy in particular ways, our capacity to shapeshift our perception is directly related to our capacity for intent. And you know, if you use every incident, as you're saying, in your life as a pathway to freedom, that means you're always working on the way you're perceiving what is in relationship to your will. Because in the Toltec tradition, as I understand it from the Castaneda material and other reflections, the will is a really important aspect of becoming a warrior and living an impeccable life. But it's all related to how we're actually perceiving the world. That the act of perception is such a fundamental aspect of everything that follows. Because like the gentleman, his perception was far more constrained and limited. So that determines everything around the constraints of your perception. And the more you can open it up through not knowing and through the psychedelic journeys and all of that, where you crack your current dream, you're enabled to shapeshift in whatever direction more easily. Just speak to us about that.
Makes me so happy. So intent is directly related to the amount of energy we have. And intent is everything, really. So in the Toltec point of view, we have our personal intent. And our personal intent is the amount of energy and will and capacity we have to stay focused. That's the warrior. So our intent is us claiming and saying, this is where I want to put my energy. And just that creates reality. You put a line of energy, because literally intent is a line of energy that you're putting into the universe. And when that line is strong, manifestation starts wrapping around it. And then it drops into form. Okay? And there's also, so there's that human intent. And I think this is sometimes where the sorcerers of old, and Don Juan talks about this as well, got into a little bit of trouble, and where sometimes we in the West can get into trouble, where we're like, it's all about just my intent. If I just put my intent out there, I can manifest whatever I want to. Not exactly.
Yes,
because there's
not
also,
exactly.
Not exactly. There's also divine intent. The Toltec call, they don't necessarily have a creator divine. How I learned from Miguel is that there's life force energy that's moving through everything. There's intent moving through everything. There's a larger intent. And that intent is way more powerful than we are. And when we try and fight it or think that like I'm the one that has the intent, we're missing. We're not really plugged in. When we open our intent to listen to what does the greater intent with a capital I have that it wants to move through me, when we get out of the way, then we are part of this flow of larger intent, and we start to learn how to look for the rivers of that intent, to look for the flows and to align with those flows. And that flow then with our individual intent, because this isn't about not having individual intent, it's about understanding our individual intent is powerful, but it's limited. When we know what our heart's desire is, what we feel like we're here to bring through, or what we dream and we feel passionate and excited about, and then we open to there's something also dreaming me, that's when things start to change drastically in our lives. And we're able to surrender. So that's part of why I brought the goddess energy in as well. Like the warrior is that intent, that commitment, 100%. Yes, I will put my energy and my resources and I will put everything behind this. That's warrior. It's incredibly powerful. And a warrior that is able to open and watch the flows of energy and travel those flows has a tremendous amount of power, and it's still limited. And for me, bringing the goddess energy in, the goddess energy is about creativity, opening, surrender, wonder. And so we then also bring in, I don't know, and I'm willing to surrender to deeply listening to my intuition, and also being willing to be wrong and be messy and try again. So for me, the goddess energy is the like, let's try, let's have fun, let's play, let's explore, let's bring joy here. Let's bring in as many people as we can in this healing. And that, there's a beautiful, beautiful saying, African saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And for me, the goddess is about, let's go together. It's going to take a lot longer, but we're going to be able to go further. And we need both. It isn't one or the other. It's bringing both in. And we need energy. So, and that goes back to, just to finish up this thought, part of why firewalking has been such a perfect match for me with the Toltec work is that it teaches people, and every time I do a firewalk, it's a healing ceremony for the land, and I learn the next level. Like it's always a ceremony, and there's always learning and insight and depth that happen with it. It's an incredibly visceral way to learn about energy. And the Toltec have, I think, some of the best tools around raising energy in terms of recapitulation. So the firewalk for me is one way, and then within the Toltec, the tools of not doings, of recapitulation, of working with intent, are all based in learning how to stop leaking energy, how to be able to contain and hold our energy, and then choose where we want to put that energy.
Yeah. Now, we're getting close to time, but since you just raised the point about recapitulation, and then there's a question about the dreams and so forth, the whole domain of dreaming and stalking in the Toltec tradition is so vast. But the practice of recapitulation is a universal practice, and it has a particular importance in Don Juan's teaching as well. So talk to us just a little bit about recapitulation as a way of bearing witness to oneself as one goes through this path of refinement.
One of the ways that we can perceive energies or humans is that humans are composed of threads of energy, of threads of light, and that they're bundled together in forms of consciousness. And that when we look at the energy of most humans, most of us have a tremendous amount of energy that is attached to the past. So those threads of our unique consciousness, each of us is a really unique ray of light, and we recognize our unique ray. So, and we also can leave it in the past. So if I had an experience as a kid where there was fear, or where I went against myself, or where I repressed something, let's say, I can leave a bit of energy behind. And each of us can often feel like this. I often say, imagine a time where you had a really difficult breakup and you had a hard time releasing the relationship. Part of it is there's so much energy invested in that relationship that unless you know how to pull it back, it's still going to live there. And so most of us, if you look at humans energetically, we look like
trauma has gravity. There's a gravitational pull to all the trauma we've experienced, for sure.
Mental trauma, emotional trauma, physical trauma, right? All the layers of trauma. Yeah. And so we end up as adults, we don't have enough energy to make change a lot of times, because our energy is all streamed back and hooked to things that happened in the past. So recapitulation is a very simple technique of using the breath to go back as a witness, to go back and witness and unhook the energy and literally breathe it back into the present so that it's available in our beings now. And in the Castaneda books, and a lot like Florinda Donner, like a lot of the people that were in the party talk about spending years in caves recapitulating their lifetime so that all of their energy is available now. I teach a simpler version of helping people every night before you go to bed, recapitulate your day, hold the energy back. And there's a couple of really important pieces with recapitulation. So if you want to know more, in Warrior Goddess Training, there's a section around recapitulation, and my other book, Warrior Heart Practice, there's a piece around recapitulation. There's a lot of the energy that we talked about as well. So maybe one day I can come back and we can do just a recapitulation. That might be the thing, Jim, is just to do a recapitulation course for ubiquity might be really, really good, because it's a simple practice, but there's pieces with it that are really important to get, so you don't re-energize the old patterns. Because a lot of times you pull more energy in, and if you don't understand how to then channel that energy, it's going to go back into your old patterns again, because that's where the lines of energy are set.
Yeah. Wow, this is extraordinary, HeatherAsh. You've been a fountain of wisdom and clarity today. I just really want to acknowledge your work and recommend your Warrior Goddess training, which is there a website that you can let us know about as we close?
Yeah. And I'm in a big transition right now. So I'm about to, I've created this whole world of Warrior Goddess, and I'm also about to create HeatherAshAmara.com and create a Substack that I'll be talking more about these larger things, and talking about my most recent transformation through a big wildfire that we had in New Mexico. So Substack's called Out of the Fire. It's not quite up yet, but it's getting there. So warriorgoddess.com is where everything currently is, all the social media stuff. And then next week, HeatherAshAmara.com, and the Substack will be out, called Out of the Fire.
Beautiful. warriorgoddess.com. And people should know that HeatherAsh is also directing our ritual in Chartres again this year. So if you want to spend more time with HeatherAsh in that sacred site of Chartres that's infused with the telluric energy of the feminine, you are more than welcome to join us for our session on the fourth liberal art, which is on musica, and we're calling it Waves of Love, the healing spheres of music that emanate from the sun, because HeatherAsh is very skilled at these matters, and then directs a annual pilgrimage to Teotihuacan. And we're in the process of partnering between Ubiquity and HeatherAsh to put the Teotihuacan pilgrimage around the Day of the Dead each year at the end of October, early November. So we'll keep everybody apprised of that. But the opportunity to make pilgrimage to these sacred sites really amplifies and enhances what we're all seeking. It's a little tough to do it in downtown Manhattan, but if you go to the Pyramid of the Sun outside of Mexico City, the whole energetic quality of the place just infuses you with an inspiration that's really hard to deny. So HeatherAsh is very present in our pilgrimage to Chartres, and also a pilgrimage to Teotihuacan that we'll be speaking more about as we traverse the next couple of months. And HeatherAsh, we would love to have you back on Guadalupe, on recapitulation, and more on Teo as the time gets closer. It's very important work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jim. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'll come to the after chat. So if anybody has more chatting you want to do, I'll be there.
So that'll bring us to a close for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link the Stan just put in the chat box. And then tomorrow, we're going to finish this week with cosmology, with a cosmologist who's going to talk to us about the latest research and how physicists are understanding the vastness of the cosmos. Kala Perkins, who's been on Humanity Rising before, just came back from a major astronomical conference in Haifa, Israel, and is going to share with us the latest on cosmology, including the latest research on sun flares, which, as we've noted before, have a very powerful effect on human attitudes and human behavior, the 11-year cycle of the sun flares. So that's all tomorrow with Kala Perkins on latest research in cosmology. All right, everyone. Bye for now. Thank you, HeatherAsh.